Joining me now in the studio to discuss the bill that would increase civil and criminal penalties for employers who engage in wage theft is the bill's author, Senator Bobby Joe Champion. Welcome.
Thank you for having me this morning to talk about such an important topic.
How big of a problem is wage theft in Minnesota?
You know, wage theft is a big problem. So let me put it in context this way. Every day, 2.9 million people get up every day and leave for work. When you think in terms of the number of people that we have documented that has experienced some wage theft is over 39,000 people a year. Now that number could go up exponentially because there are people who just feel as if there's nothing that can be done, so they don't do anything. So we believe that it's a growing problem.
Currently, what recourse do workers have when they are victims of wage theft, which can be not being paid at all, not getting overtime, not getting minimum wage, coercion to work extra hours? What recourse do they have?
You know, right now they can call the Department of Labor and Industry, and they are limited, right? Because some of the things that we're trying to address, like for an example, the department to have subpoena power so that they can get these companies to give certain information so that they can really take a look at whether there is a problem. Secondly, what do you do with that information, right? You know, how do we make sure that we're also still protecting people's due process rights? So even with a company who says, you know, if the Department of Labor and Industry is able to glean that information, if an employer says, well, hey, no, I still believe that I didn't do anything wrong, what is the process that they can go through expeditiously in order to make sure that their due process rights are still being protected, right? And so when you have that balance, I think that's important to make sure that people in Minnesota feel safe and feel like if they're working for a company with an expectation of being paid, that they are paid what they expect, right? And if not, there should be a remedy. So we want to deter those things from happening, wage theft.
So essentially this legislation is laying out a process by which employees can contact someone, and there is a process that these claims can be looked at so that remedies are made. Is that kind of correct?
Absolutely, and
okay.
Not to mention, you probably did have an opportunity to hear the hearing yesterday where there's a cross-section of people who said, I did go to the Department of Labor and Industry, and they were not able to help me because there were no protections in law that could be helpful for me. In fact, there was a woman by the name of, I think her name is Elizabeth Neely, who came and testified on behalf of her son, who's a college student, who had worked for a company along with his friends, did great work, but guess what? They didn't get paid. In fact, she thought that he was the only person, because they were so persistent, to even get a small portion of the money that they were owed. But when you think in terms of the money that they didn't receive, which is over $20,000, she said, we came to the Department of Labor and Industry. They could not help me. So this legislation would help provide a mechanism for my son and others like him to get the outcomes or the remedies that they deserve when they work for a wage and they are not given the money that they were promised.
So is this really an enforcement issue? Because a lot of these things already are against the law, but they're not being enforced. People, businesses, employers are finding ways around these laws. So this is really just further ways to enforce law?
Enforce it, but clarify it. For an example, in our legislation, we define what wage theft is, right? We make it very clear. We also set up some parameters around due process. You and I talked about that. And in fact, we want to close the loophole, right? If individuals are taking advantage of workers every single day, we want to make sure that people get the money and the protections that they deserve. So it's not just enforcement, but it's enforcement along with the process, along with protections.
Now, one of the testifiers for the Minnesota Recruiting and Staffing Association talked about freelancers, contingent workers, independent contractors, consultants. They go by many names. She said that this kind of work is expected to grow to become as much as 40% of the future workforce. Does this proposal address that kind of work, which is exempt from many of the labor laws we're talking about?
Well, let me say right now, that is an area that we are talking a whole lot about it. How can we address that issue? Because that is a growing issue. And I said to you off camera is that there's never any single piece of legislation that can solve all problems of the world, but we need to make sure that we are mindful of the various challenges that different aspects of work presents, right? So I believe that it will be helpful and it will move us in the right direction to even help those workers so that individuals if they're independent contractors, if they whatever name that you want to call them. If there is an expectation, if they are to be paid, then they should be paid. And I think that person's last name was Lathan, I think it was her last name, who testified yesterday. But the problem that she identified was one that we should all work towards solving, not running away from. And so some of my problems with the chamber or with the Retailers Association is not that they're not quality organizations, because I think that they're wonderful organizations, but I think sometimes they're so short-sighted. They can see the problem, but they can't see the solution. They say that there's a problem and that wage theft is bad, but they don't propose any viable pathway by which to say, we want to not just protect an employer, but we want to protect an employee. And we want to be partners in going forward, because all citizens are important to us, not just the business owner, but also the person who comes to staff that company.
You know, it's likely that many victims of wage theft are not aware of their rights, or they're afraid of reprisals. They're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid of not having any money at all. What would you say to those people? How did they find a way to speak up?
You know, I think yesterday was a start. In fact, there was a young lady who was a Spanish-speaking person who had an interpreter who cried the majority of her testimony, because she talked about her fear and how she needed to provide for her family, how speaking up created a situation that could be detrimental to her family. But she also understood the importance of sacrifice, to say that if I have to make the sacrifice today so that someone doesn't have to feel what I feel, go through what I'm going through, then I'm willing to do that. And I would say to any person who's experiencing this, speak up. Put it on the record, as they say, so that we can acknowledge it, and for it not to just be anecdotal, and for us to put a face behind the name, because sometimes we hear these stories, and legislators sometimes are really good with denying the obvious, right? Oh, no one's complaining to us. No one's saying anything to us. And that is supposed to perhaps lead people to believe that there's no problem and that others are just making it up. Yesterday was an opportunity for the committee that I serve on, and others who got a chance to see it on television, to see that there is a real problem, and that we need to be responsible, we need to be responsive, and we need to make sure we prevent it from happening to any other person, whether it's a member of our family or our neighbor or someone we may never know. But we know that person has a family, we know that person has value, and so I just think it's a start. And so those people should speak up, call the Department of Labor Industry, call their legislators as well, to say, hey, yes, this is a problem. And for there to be a cross-section of people to come forward with varied stories, I think speaks to the importance of this important piece of legislation.